Hadonyan Bisancha Tanji, Anjalana Miba, Yuntoba Zuba Sonjija, Pomporum Boche, Genicho Toparja, Tiche de Pombichu Nizeni, Tanyan Sonomi Jovanyambi, Samba Shonshu, the Sensibi Guni, Samba Tsara.
Rinpoche first requests us to enter into these teachings in the noble disposition of bodhicitta, wishing to study in order to help all sentient beings by bringing each and every being throughout the vast infinity of space to the state of utterly pure, most perfect, and most precious enlightenment.
Shiro Soso Taba, no Shonshi Sandy Damba, Sonwa Hoji Dambati, Danamba Son Yokununi, Aterina Sonwa Hoji Damba Yibikar.
This afternoon, in our study of Dharma, we continue with our study of the 3 levels of vows, that is, the outer vows of self-liberation, the pratimoksha, the inner vows of the bodhisattva, and the secret vows of Vajrayana. And this afternoon we start the section on the secret vows of Vajrayana.
Andi Damba Songsata Shishana Da Chutan Jing Tatu Yong Songhog Chu Yambare Labada Da Bogunu Shunyan Shen Kananji and the Shanda Gachiva Yimbare Karere Lana, Tangaros Songhog Chunian and Shilling Lani, Tini on Yo Tinina La Gam Hadavala Supata Moboshi, that in the Yobare. That Dana, that Danzi Yabuchi, Somahina, the Tanjing and River Mepare. The Indira, Tini Danzi Songana, Danzi the Karinda which is Songo, the Songs of the Jinda which go. Te Hakogari de Mete Mahina, Teni, Dansi Nyanrovare, Te Dansi Nyansona, Tin Songhogin River Tanti Manjumare, Te Indulana, Tate Manyabachi Shegana, Te Sonsata Trayabuchi, Hakogara.
The Vajrayana teachings are the zenith of the Buddha's teachings, the very summit or the highest of all the teachings, and also they are, of all the Buddha's teachings, the one that were preserved most perfectly in Tibet rather than any other place. And for Tibetans they were very, very important. They were something very widely practiced. People receive empowerments, they recite mantras, they do visualizations of the different so-called deities, different aspects of the enlightened mind. And when one does those practices, receives empowerment and does the practices, then if one cannot maintain the commitment, which is often referred to by its Sanskrit name of samaya, if one cannot keep the commitment, then there will be no result. So it's very important to know just what the commitments are, to know how to keep them, how not to lose them. Then in that way, whatever practice we do can bring proper result. First, before looking at the commitments, it's very good that we have a clear understanding of what is the difference between what is called sutra and what is called tantra, these 2 major areas of the Buddha's teaching. What is sutra level of Dharma practice, what is tantric level or Vajrayana level of Buddhist practice. Need to be able to distinguish clearly between those 2.
Tata chepa mahina, tangarong ho gondeo tena yung, tondo no gondi neji. 마로고 노강데요 젠데나 당당 허이나지 마로고 단동허니 강히요 젠데나요 당당 노허니가 많이 빠지나지 되이나는 되니 노가나요 노도 가리라고지 뭐가나요 허도 가리라고지 또 희가 말이면 마히나 이노샤 데디나 많이 빠지 쳐디고 말이.
If we don't know clearly what each of these categories of practice involves, then even though we might think we're doing them, we might be doing something that isn't them at all. If we don't know what Vajrayana actually means and is, for instance, we could be doing what ostensibly is a Vajrayana practice, but actually, because of the very way we're doing it, it's a sutra level practice. Or the other way around, we could be doing what we're doing what seems to be a sutra level practice, but we're doing it with Vajrayana ideas, so it's no longer simply a sutra level practice. Or we could be doing any of those, sutra or Vajrayana level, but the way we're doing it, it's neither of them.
되니나 당 알아서 배나나 당아 뭐강히요 바래 라강히요 바래라 뭐강히요 바래 짜강히요 농강히요 티레강히요 라나 되니 초롱 농바래 말해라나 나 농바이 대강히요 라나 대요 진짜 요바 말해 가래라나 배나나 자가 힌두고 줄 요바래 초롱소 하고 바래 대라요 짜강히요 바래 농강히요 바래 티레강히요 바래 라강히요 바래 대이나 대용 농바여봐. 되니 힌두고 주도 농바니 주지여봐. 대 가래년에 시나요 제바메봐. 농바가 주거나요 송지지여봐. 힌두고 주거나요 송지지여봐. 되니 힌두시 농바시 카카카 세제 도메봐. 너 이때 된지 쳐디고 바래. 대 가래년에 시나요 제반다고 쳐 된지 되고 바래. 대 대인들라 대 ngala ganghiyo re cheba chaw marilan te ngala la ganghiyo ki kelane te ko jinse gemba yo ba mari te ngala long ganghiyo bara chodon da marilan ngala yo ra la na teni nyaga ko iwa se gong yo ba mari de inana ta de ti ko cheba da wo ji da garin sha ko ya po ji ngotsu ko mari.
For instance, we might be doing what's usually called a deity practice. We might be visualizing, and also we might be, within the visualization, working on the channels, chakras, energies, the bindu, and so on. And so, does that make us a Buddhist? Does that make it Buddhist practice? Not at all. It's not necessarily Buddhist Vajrayana practice. Because we find, for instance, in Hinduism, they have deities, they have practices which put you in relationship with your deity, where you think of the deity, you go through certain actions. They have channels, they have chakras, they have pranayama, meditation. So then, what's the difference? What's the difference? Is there a difference? And if there is, then we need to know it. Otherwise, if you meet Hindu practices, say, what do you do? Oh, I visualize this deity. Oh, I do that too. I visualize a deity. Oh, yeah, and beside that, oh, well, I work on the subtle inner energies and control. Oh, we do that too. Then, oh, it's the same. We're exactly the same. Most of the actions could be seen from that point of view as very, very similar. So, if there is a difference between the two, we need to know it. We need to know what makes it Buddhist practice. Beside these mechanisms of visualization, working with energies, what is it that makes it Buddhist?
Tani ngaronso pena no nomba dawo ji machila. Yamba ji go. Ta nomba yapo yo ba mare. Lana ngaron zhōrōng xiō bārē, kōng chō xiō bārē. Bē dī nōng xiō dā, ngā rōng gō nōng bā jī gā yāmbā, chū lī yāmbā lā, chō rō sō yāpō yō bā mā rē lā na, yāmbā dē yōng kōng chō xiō bārē. Tā tēndē zī jī gā jī lā kōng chō wā xē dū chō lā na, tēn gā sō xiong xī cēn bī. 티 동안용 와도 생제라 컨트롤 라서 봐 시냐 말아 티 드니시나 리히고 봐 말이
If amongst Buddhists, if you said to somebody, "Oh, I don't think you're a very good Buddhist, where you're practicing," then they probably get upset at you. And that would be quite a normal human reaction if we criticized another Buddhist for what they were doing. So like this, if as Buddhists we criticize another faith and we say, "Oh, I don't think it's very good what you're doing," then we should expect a very similar reaction. It's not something that would naturally make people upset, because we're humans. And that's not good, because we are committed to a path of the bodhisattva, of kindness, and it's the contrary to what we're trying to do, to say things or do things which make other people upset, angry, and so on.
대인들이라는 마로소 농바이나 농바 야포이나 인동도 하고 근데 가리시는 농바디 찐득이래. 연발이 제바다 가리를 파는데 가리 야본데 여동도 가리리 제바다 찐득이 다 대마히바 마로 야포를 되나 진짜 매바 쳐도 봐래. 배나 뭐가 충주지거 파케비 뒤쪽이오나 뭐가 충주티 동바하고 혀말 뭐 아바베 야포를 라기오 봐래. 옛날에는 당문이 제나 아바 야포 메나요. 때 가르레드는 뭐가 진짜 희희오 봐 말이. 고로가 아바마 야포요 고트한테 충주 하마거나 아바 야포요를 라래. 당도 문이 제나 아바 야포 어요마요 코하고 말이. 된다고래. 말아서 당도 농바 야포를 라가나 야포 인통 때문에 하고 메래. 그 야포레 카가라지마도 가래서요. 긴지라고 지니 하고 말이. 근데 이나는 달라나 모델라리 용도 봐 말이. 뭐봐 혼자 하고 말. 연바지가 지레라가나 오다다 이래서 주거던라고 근데라 모델라리 된 거지도 또 농바 손집이 뽕자래. 근데 신난 리면도 인디디라나 시야가 야보지 가리냐나시나 야보지 학 고집에 같이도.
Therefore, if we want to truly value what we're doing, the choice we're following of being Buddhist, and truly value that, while of course having respect for the others, then we must really know why what we're doing is the best choice. It's no good just having blind faith in it and thinking, I'm Buddhist, Buddhist is best, Buddhist is great. We need to know the reasons why the Buddha's teaching is so wonderful, why it's so special. We need to know what distinguishes it, what can be achieved by it. We need to know how it is different from other things which on the surface look very similar. But then if there is a difference, we need to know what it is. And because our choice is Buddhist, we need to know why it's better. Obviously we want to choose the thing which is best. That's very natural. So then we need to know when things are very similar, if there's a difference, why this difference makes one thing a better way to follow than another thing. Not to know that, just to be Buddhist because you're Buddhist, is blind faith. And blind faith is part of ignorance. Ignorance is something that is to be given up. It's one of the things that as Buddhists we're trying to shake out of our minds, any sort of confusion and ignorance. So therefore we need to know very clearly what the Buddha's teachings are. And Rinpoche gives the example of a child. If you told a child that the child's father's no good, then that wouldn't be a nice thing to do anyway, but the child is not in any situation actually to judge the father. Not at all. So it's better to tell the child, your daddy's great, because it will help the child. Even if the father isn't that great, there's no point telling the child, because he can't understand what's going on. It's all beyond, above his head. Doesn't understand that sort of thing yet, probably. So there's no point. There's no point about it. And so, if ever we are going to enter into any real dialogue about the values of faiths, then we need to know very, very, very well what's going on.
다 대자 시바라 가리시에 거래라나 다 손지 전에 되고까 에 자치보래 왜 몸보래 데이디라 나랑 소용 히라 자치보요 바마래 되니 까베 자치보래 다니 다 가리시에 거라나 다 손지 전에 되고 롱거 땜바 롱거 섬바 되니 로방 러드 되니 바덴다와 줘봐 라수비 되니 자가르치 밴드다 담치지 되니 노슈니 다 엄마 자와히라 라수바 다 몸보송 오바래 다 대당치니 다바 땡라 페즈 까고노니 네 당치 취드니 다 드리 땡 오바래 대차라 다 문이시나 로조야 보시에 거바래
The Buddha's teaching happens to be very, very vast, very extensive. And the Buddha's teaching has been preserved as what's called the Buddha Shasana, or the Buddha doctrine, in the texts which are the Tripitaka. And that very well preserved body of what the Buddha himself actually taught was then analyzed, expounded upon, and presented by the great Indian masters like Nagarjuna, like Chandrakirti, and many, many other great masters and scholars. And as they work with what we generally call the sutra level, which covers all three baskets, Sutra, Vinaya, Abhidhamma, the sutra level of teachings, then they produced the great commentaries which became the references for the various philosophical traditions of Buddhism. Great texts like the root text on the wisdom of the middle way by Nagarjuna and so on. In that way the various philosophical traditions have been well established, and we should have some clear notion of what those philosophical traditions are saying by studying them.
되니 다 마쇼니라고 지나 다 저거동 롱크거 다 땜바 너는 지디 못 보여 버리 다 대용 말어서 다지 진행시거나 온보면 히라총 다 드리디디를 깔리 가보여 버리 대나는 다 자르지 저체나지 이제 비명어 못 보여 버리 대통기 네 주드니 대나 봐봐 다 더찰라 지 진행시 다 드리시디나 드니요 혹다와도 가린다고 지선데 쇼바도 가린다고 요선데 곰바도 가린다고 요선데 드니 하고 오고 버리.
Then, beside those great philosophical traditions that have very well established the sutra level of the Buddha's teaching, then there is the Vajrayana level or tantric level of the Buddha's teaching, and this comes from various sources. Some comes from the Buddha's Nirmanakaya, from the historical Buddha, we might say. Some comes from, or more than that, but the Nirmanakaya, and then some comes from the Sambhogakaya. Whichever one it may be, this has given rise to the various tantras. And these tantras as practices and so forth are actually quite difficult for those of duller faculties to understand. They're vast, they're complex. And what has developed from the great Indian masters who held and who propagated these tantras is a tradition of oral instruction handed down from generation to generation that goes along with the practice. And that oral instruction, that heart-to-heart or person-to-person advice, covers such topics as the view, that is to say, the understanding of reality behind the practice, the meditation that you do, how to do it, and then what's called conduct, which applies to outside formal meditation sessions.
다 대통지 노나추 네 두나 다 노호 제발로 오지 가리오리라나 다 제발만다와 이겨라고 줘 버리다 노리 제발도 봐봐 계속 이겨 제발도 봐라나라 만다와 이겨라나라 다 된디요 버리.
If we resume all of that, the vastness of the sutras and of the tantras, and we try and pinpoint the difference, we come to four main differences that distinguish the sutras from the tantras and which show us how the tantras are the highest of the teachings.
다 디노니 다 제바도 봐봐 지나라 문다와 동복 가리리지나 따와 문다 바리 노하니 뭐냐 따와 모마모지고니 제바요 바리 도수니 따와 뒤에서지 몸바죠. 화수니 따와도 뒤에서지 마몸바. 제바요 바리.
The first thing which distinguishes them and which makes the Vajrayana superior is the view. The view in each of those. And the view tends to be more limited in the sutra level of teachings, and it tends to be unlimited or unrestricted through, the actual word is darkness or ignorance. It sounds a bit strong, but anyway, that's what it says. So the one is a little bit more, I think limited is the best word, restricted, and the other one is beyond those restrictions. Vajrayana view doesn't have those limitations, those restrictions of the Sutrayana view.
다 가린다고서 뭐뭐뭐요 바래라나? 다 도수니 조 동이 짜던담 히요 바래. 다 동수라고 지나 그러니 제바요 바 말이 너하니라. 나보래. 얘나요? 홍쇼니 홍이쇼니 더니 언도 오노라나? 싫어. 땡요 바 말이 싫어 히요 바 말이. 땡이나나? 더니 허거노니 홍쇼다요. 배 짠다시니. 히요 바리. 땡이나나? 다 조 홍쇼니 따와 제바도 봐봐. 저디요 바리.
The reason for this difference in the view is that in Sutrayana, what's called the view, the understanding of reality, tends to be much more heavily focused on shunyata, or voidness, emptiness. And it doesn't develop that much the nature of what's called appearances, manifestation. In Vajrayana, the view that underpins the practice not only has the same equivalent understanding of voidness, but it has a very clear and excellently developed understanding of the nature of appearances, of the things that manifest to the mind. This was what makes the view not limited by that lack of understanding of appearances.
따따 동바 가린다 오지레 노아 가린다 오지레 세 개자히거나 따베 노냐가 히거레 마로소 디소메레 데따 주 누게거나 다 제바디오사다 농수니오 바레 라이거나 리디오 바레 시야달라 히야동라 볼라용 전타만다 바 몽보요 바레 만다바 오 히야스 만다바 몽보요레 데 얘나용 당가로소 까지빌룰라 농수니 제바요 라이거나 농수니
If we go any further with this topic, then, we've got need to take quite a time. Because once we start to develop these differences of view concerning voidness and appearances, then it takes us into vast and subtle areas of thought. And also, if we take the various traditional views within Buddhism, and particularly those preserved within Tibet, then not everyone agrees. So this takes us into more complicated waters. But if we take simply our Kagyu view, without explaining it, we can say that from a Kagyu point of view, this is definitely how we see it, that the Vajrayana has a much more vividly clear and complete understanding of manifestation as well as voidness.
나로서 까지비 다 연동 연동시 나로서 현두지도용 조지 디쇼니 레옹효바레.
So this is because in our Kagyu tradition we embrace a view or a philosophical stance which is known as devoid of other. Not everyone agrees with that. So to come back to the point, this first difference between Sutra and Tantra is that the view of Sutra is more limited. The second difference is in meditation. In Vajrayana, there is an enormously greater wealth of meditation technique than there is in Sutrayana.
Penana dosha hedon temu ngaja tatra pa pon magapa koron lang de sheni ganta mombo teni magonola yobare ndogonola tatra pa mabonda de lang de sheni ganta tedi ta samo yopamare ta tendilana gamba ta sa maza ke chebayo ta yobare mo ke cheba de pa yobare.
For instance, in Vajrayana meditation, we have all of the different techniques and types of visualization stage, development stage, generation stage, whichever word we use, meditations, visualizations. We have completion stage, meditations of so many different sorts. These aren't found at all in the Sutrayana. Compared to Vajrayana, the number of meditation possibilities, techniques available, is very, very much less. There are just so many of them in the Vajrayana. Some of them what are called characterized, with very specific things to meditate on. Some of them profound, beyond characteristics type meditations. And with this very great particularity, in that in the Sutrayana level of teachings, one has to abandon mind poisons, desire, anger, jealousy, pride, confusion. The process of meditation is to shed these, to get rid of these, before the realization can emerge. Whereas the specificity of Vajrayana is that it has profound method, which enables one to actually use those imperfections of the mind as a basis for the practice itself.
Kawa yome ke cheba yo pare kali khabu yome ndonga ni la penano ndo ta ba yina no ta songji khaja ta ba ta pa ngaro so deja tomo go ngo dong hiena dome sang de so so de ba song ni songji ba ri si teni ju ki yo pare ta to umbo 농부 온도 동 되는 게 말이 되면 온보 린도 타발라서 봐이나 좀에 선치 소던라 좀에 선치 소선 라서 봐 좀에 몸보지 봐도 도서 봐 용이 송지 그 말이 되는 게 말이 얘나요 뭐라 되는 얘네 보고 봐 말이 뭐라 온보 용란다고 지나나 특기라요 도지요고 공부 송지 타발이 배나 제스 말하다 또 야가르저 또 몸보 특기 루지라 송지 그 거니 송지 요 봐 저봐도 되는 게 말이 다 대용 많이 나요. 다 가서 리나요. 당시 좀 마송 야부지 세원나는 다 뭐세 지루 팔아 먹어 봐. 송지 든지 송어 봐리. 대인들야. 이 가와 요매용 제발 배치 먹어 봐리.
대주전 니빠기나가 공 그거
아
The Johnson Shiginang, the Sumbare. The third difference between the Sutrayana and the Vajrayana is that the Vajrayana is relatively easy. It's much easier. Now, to put this in the right perspective, then for instance, our historical Buddha, it took our historical Buddha what are called 3 endless cosmic eons to attain enlightenment. That's the way it seems on the general level of perception. 3 cosmic eons is a long time. And he was an example of somebody of sharp faculties following the Mahayana path. If one has middling or blunter faculties, then following the Mahayana path could take much more than 3 endless cosmic eons. It could take hundreds of endless cosmic eons. That's a very, very long time. So when we have that sort of perspective, and we know that in Vajrayana, then it's possible to attain enlightenment in just one lifetime, as Milarepa did, as some of the great Indian Mahasiddhas did. And if not in one lifetime, if one maintains pure samaya, then in several lifetimes, or up to possibly 16 lifetimes, if the samaya is kept pure. When one compares those two, then there is an enormous difference between Sutrayana and Vajrayana.
Then ombo no to kchebare yiba. Ombo no to ombo tobo. Pianano hog nyalan shenka tata ombo no bor yambare. Do nyalan shenka tata ombo tobo na yambare. Ombo no to kcheba yobare.
So pena toloke ombo
tobo yobare nemba. Ngoli nyalan shenka tata ombo.
The fourth difference is that the Mahayana path suits those of duller faculties, and the Vajrayana path suits those of sharper faculties.
Ta tela yo goaji hago gobare. Di ombo no to. Pena ta ngaroso ndele yo jetata. Ta pajen to ho nyolan shenke injire. Ta ngaroso kaso ombo nombo yibare la gana. Mase injire mari. Di talana ki tosi shekende.
This needs some explaining maybe, because if we look around here, then most of us are practicing Vajrayana Buddhism, Tantric Buddhism, whether we are sharper, middling, blunter faculties would take some looking into.
Ta?
What to say now? We need to sort this out for ourselves. So, actually the explanation for this is the following, is that when through practice we gain what is called the view of Vajrayana, the insight, which gives us this understanding of reality, when that view is attained, then by the very definition one is somebody of sharp faculties. It's that sharpness, it means the acuity of perception of the nature of things. Until through practice it's attained, then it doesn't mean everyone who's practicing Vajrayana is a sharp-faculted person.
Yeah, tan do re ga ta ga nu. Tan do te pa chen bo re ga na. To ni la ko ya pon du sen no ni. Nge ya pon du. Ta ndo ga nyan la xie ji zo de ni re, so ni du ni ji ni re. To ni ya bo yo, ko ya bo yo. Nyan la ya bo yo. Ni ji nyan la ya bo yo na. Ta ni mu ni te pa chen bo ndo nyan la xie ga ga.
When we look at the Sutrayana, and if we take the Mahayana aspect of the Sutra level of teachings, then although it's vast, we can sum it up as the development of understanding of voidness on the one hand, and the development of heartfelt compassion on the other hand. That's what emerges from Mahayana, voidness and compassion. If there is no understanding of voidness, if there's barely any compassion, we can't really call it Mahayana.
Ta tepa chenpo re me na, ta tepa chunga re yang nga ro sta jire. Ta tepa chunga la, ta kari gata la na. Ko wa ri dru to dunga che rong ki hi, ta te le tanduk, nin ju chuma ma yin pa. Di ting la, tani, so ta ji dang pa ya pu chi. Song gan du, ta ten du song ma du. Ta la na ta gan du.
And if we shift our attention away from Mahayana, then still within the sutra level, this gives us what are called the Hinayana way. And the Hinayana way is defined by its ability to quell or to pacify the sufferings of the 6 realms. It gives us the means to go beyond the sufferings of samsara. It's not endowed with great compassion like the Mahayana, but it gives the means for liberation from samsara. And this is mainly accomplished through the discipline of the pratimoksha vows, the self-liberation vows. If there is not that discipline, then not the liberation, then that isn't, then there's not the real Sutrayana, Hinayana level of practice.
Tangaroso chitana songhwa rendu ya songhwa remena tepa chenpo rendu tepa chenpo remena tepa chunga rendu Tataremena Tani, Tepa Cheshin, Sakanola Emaso. Ta Karedi, Rotina. Oh, Tanga, Tepa Chunga, Consorendi, not Tepa Chambo, no Consorendi, not Tepa Chambo, Hogo Consorendi, Tini, Hakondi. Mase, Sankanola Leojimari. Mase winning what you say, carried injury. Karina was in the Gitagni.
So this is a good opportunity for some honest introspection and to ask oneself, am I a Vajrayana practicer? Have I got this view? Have I acquired the view? Or if not, then, am I a Mahayana practicer? Do I have understanding of voidness? Do I have great compassion? And then if we're not a Mahayana practicer, then say, then maybe I'm a Hinayana practicer. I've got great self-discipline and observing the conduct, and I'm freeing myself from samsara. And if one can't fit into any of those three categories,
so
then we should ask ourselves, so maybe we should ask people to put their hands up to say which one they think they belong to. Joking. If you can't fit into any one of those three, could be quite embarrassing, so we won't ask for an honest hands-up survey. Maybe in the future.
Tata, no chepa, Yundra, no Tudina, Moya, Taba, Chepa, Gomba, Taba, Momo, Chepa, Gomba, Momo, Chepa, Tashopalan and Didi Malan and Kawa, you make a chepa, the Nikonzo, Umbo no to the chepa, that Yundra would do. That he just gonna tell Jachi already. Tachi, Tondo, that literally already said, Hina, Teso Yapundua thing, or to take much tea.
To come back to a summary of that, then we have the main points, which it will be very, very good to bear in mind, something to take away from this teaching and remember as the essence of it, which is that there is a difference between Sutrayana and Vajrayana. Vajrayana is the better one for 4 reasons. The first, because of its view, which is unlimited compared to limited Mahayana one. Second reason is because of its meditation, which has so many more techniques and possibilities. The third difference is that relatively it is easier because it gives the result in such a shorter period of time than the Mahayana. And the fourth one is that it develops the sharpest faculties compared to the sutra level, which doesn't develop such sharp faculties. So then, now as far as the commitments are concerned, or the samaya, first we need to know what that means.
Lungo yo some tamal de niba. Tati Bosho de Jiba. Lungo is in tamal de ni Bosho de Jiba. Ta Korong Don Gajita Lutama de Niba. Not Tama de Niba. Saint Tama de Niba. Di Bosho de Jiba. Ta Don Gajitari.
The word for commitment, which is dompa in Tibetan, means in its etymology to bind. What we are binding are our body, speech and mind, including all of the habits of body, speech, and mind. So we're binding those three things along with all of the habitual tendencies.
Tati dombar sijeta. Takaniri lanana. Lan ho chu sa. Lu la sa. Ngo ho da. Ho sa. Ye chu ni de sa.
The means for binding those three things, the means are threefold. They are to visualize the deities, they are to recite the mantras, and they are to let the mind settle in the true nature, what's called the Dharmata.
Te dam ni ta only topi ta tsara ta songje ta wa go dam ngo na ore.
The discipline for being able to bind body, speech and mind through visualization, mantra and setting the mind in its essence, the discipline for doing that is obtained through empowerment. And so that through that we have the essence of what Bompa or commitment means, or this word samaya, if we take the Sanskrit.
Ta de no ni ta xian zhe wo ji zu xie na. Ta ma ji lu de. Ta ma ji lu se ji nga rong ji ba la ko mo du lu yo do ju ka zong la ko ge ba re. Ngu po yo do ju tang je la ko yu ju ba re. Ngu na ngu po zhe ka zong la. Da da di ga sa nga rong so lu xia zhuo li zhe ba. Ngu po de tang je ne sa do re ra. Ngu jong li zhe ba. Da de ta ma ji hi ba la ba re. Ta ma ji na du jiao ge song ba. Ngu ni ma yin ba. De da ga ri xie ge ba re ji na. De du jiao ma re. De yong ta ba re. Xing gu po tang ji de da yi kang zhao. Ya ye kang zhao. Jian kang zhao. Nong san jie tang ji. Lan zhao. Song jin zhao. Da den zhi nie de xie de pa dang ta ge xiu ba re.
This process of binding means that at present we have what's called the ordinary body. Now this ordinary body does not mean just our own human body. It means the entire body of reality as we perceive it. So that means our own body, everyone else's bodies, the world that we perceive around us, of the rocks and the trees and the mountains. All of that is it's called the everyday body. The reason, and that's perceived as people made of flesh and blood, is perceived as the environment made of rock and earth and leaves and all those sorts of things. This is perceived in the way it's perceived because of the mind's conditioning and history. So when we bind that deluded perception, which is not true, when we bind it by identifying it with the utterly pure, true nature of everything. So we visualize that all the beings become the deity, and all of the environment becomes the pure land of the deity. It's this identification with what is pure and true that binds the impure and untrue.
Tate garin da uji yambari lana rong rong ko sen ga gari zo gam 생각 가리 제나 우포 탐 제 데이터도 전로 효바리 좀보 거나 좀보 전로 효바리 냠바 거나 냠바 전로 효바리 배나 나롱 손다고지 보고 nom바라고지나 배나 딜라오노라 레나 딜라고노 레고나 아 대반다고 르베 야본드 소 콜라베 찌본다고 줘바리 그 대반다고 우니 다 그수 되게 뭐보드 빼 야본드 소 콜라는 빼 대반다고 줘바리 다 가리래라나 나롱도 빼 야보레 나롱소 라레 나롱 탕하레 나롱소 추레 대 나롱소 광리 뭐보시오 바리 달라티아니 이 나롱 통나 야보 줘바리 얘나요 가신다고 지 뭐지 고나 용매나 줄을 매봐 뭐시로나 하 괜찮아 라라 대소지 생라 못 봐도 생 대소지 예 생라는 눈한다고 지래 라라는 대소지 줘 드리 공화래 됐다 가리 해공화래지나 코로나 때 관리 매봐래 달라대니 나라는 종행로 희워봐 말이 가실래 예바 줄을 해오나 코로 두본다고 지 나로서 손다 코 야본다고 콜란 제반도 말이 때 나로서 로 이거 통라 njवा요 바래 njवा요 바라 때니 노아다 차용 라라는 대바 대바 라라라는 등한다고 지티지 노마라 nj와 쳐노 요 바래 다 디타다 화가슬 때 하고 다 들이지디 티라 디 가타다다 들이요 바래.
This way of binding the mind needs to be absolutely universal. It needs to be able to be applied to whatever the mind does. It needs us to help us understand the mind in all of its actions and facets, good or bad. That's what the binding is through identification. So to give an example of the mind and how it is, then if a Tibetan came into this shrine room, they come through the door and look around, and they'd probably be really happy because they see, oh, look, nice tonkas and Buddha statues and nice artwork, Tibetan style. They'd feel, oh, this is a great place. It's a temple where all the things that we value and treasure are represented. They'd feel good coming in here. Whereas maybe somebody from another faith, especially a faith which doesn't like imagery, so say a Muslim came in here and saw this, even though it's exactly the same temple, they look at it, they'd see all of these images, they'd see these statues, they'd probably feel uncomfortable, to say the least. They'd probably feel very uncomfortable, unhappy about it, and it wouldn't at all be the same reaction. The shrine room is the same, but depending on who comes into it, the effect is very, very different. The whole way the thing is perceived is very, very different. And this is just a simple example of how our mind's reality is so subjective. It's so much a projection. And this binding of the mind, this practice of Vajrayana, helps us understand the mind in all of its aspects and maneuvers. It gives us the insight into how the mind does project in all sorts of ways.
다 디거 도나나 우보 탐제라 두저도 나로서 못다가 다 나로서 녀내시디라나 플라감 정고감 다 든디시엔디와 다 제거던 거 자반도 더 그래 다 든디시 가로 광디시거나 노아카 좀 야폰다고지 저로 효바래 야보지 강타나 노아라 운이 저송지 메바래 롱롱롱라 고로 가리 가나 드니라고 노트키고 바래 됐다 디 강타대용 드리도 대용 바래 노마도 뭐 덴바트 반다고 운이 요바 말해 되니 롱롱 산라 가리라고 보셔 덴바 가리라고 강 김부 쳐서나 노마도 던다고 쳐로 바래 다팅인디테라나 나로서 강디테라나 지 몰라 뭐뭐 강바 롱라 롱뭐 강바 플라강 Mala Sanjay Magamba, the Tanjung, Hiron get the gong. The Sar do Dondra Magamba, the Hinkado, Yayikon, that the reason are so Gatom Buki. The needle which you hear worry.
So what we do when we bind the mind through deity practice is that we take our way of perceiving, whatever it is, that is as it is because of our conditioning, because of our subjectivity. We take that and we work with it, and by identifying ourselves and other beings with the deity, by identifying places around us, the world we move through, with being the Pure Land, then we create a new conditioning of the mind, and that new conditioning of the mind, which is rooted in what is sacred and truth, gives us a pure perception of reality. It gradually, as we develop the practice, the old conditioning fades away, and a new pure relationship is established.
Benana Zombali Titola, Jaka Mombori, Muri Momboyo Pari, Rona Legi Momboyo Pari, Lange. Rede, Zombali Tamola, Katwago, Yapo Choson, Yomari, Lala, Benyamboyana, Lala Kentanda, Soon, Yobare. Did the Shunzi the Caridina? Shirula Muni Dembatrasunti, Yobamari, Zuno, Ronga Sanga. Yapoyon, or shake your body. The thing in Dulana, then Dratham Cheta, Maroso, Honda. That the Dilla Yapon, near the Gantini Sidina, then Dratham Cheyon, the job mepa, Yapona would eat. Roti your body.
It's the same thing with sound. In our world, all sorts of languages have developed for different sorts of reasoning, and they sound a bit different, and some of them sound a bit strange, and some of them sound like this, some of them sound like that, and then in our human speech there are some things which are good, there are some things which are bad. So sound and speech has so many different facets that have developed through a conditioning, a programming that's lasted for a long time. Whatever they are, good or bad, we take that conditioning, and then through binding it with mantra practice, then we develop a new habit, we develop a new standpoint, which is sacred and pure, where whatever there was before, now there is the pure hearing of sound, any sound, as mantra.
Then you tune the size, son of Junoni, Tamat. Yadina, that's Sandra. San Tunisi, Chutonchi, necessary. Nisin the gum to the Shakabaris. That needs it, Tangaroso, that a new Yamari. Then you give my niece near one of the gum.
So that's the body, the everyday body of the universe. That's the speech, all the different sounds and languages of the world. And then the third thing is the mind. And there we're going to bind everyday mental activity, the habitual mental activity, through the power of the practice, to recognize the dharmata, which means the true nature of mind. As we've seen in the other aspect of this course, we didn't quite get there yet, to the true nature of mind, but when we get there, then we'll be able to identify all aspects of mental activity as having as their nature this true nature of reality.
Ta mo se nga le pa ni tu la. Inji lo ba la nyu da hie le. Sa yin ni la. Sa no mo tong che. Do ba mo mo yo re song che. Nyu da hie le gon da wo cha de. Ji ma nga ri go na. Hie ni ko wa ko ti nyu da le on le.
Rinpoche says, considering the teachings he's been giving, and that he's giving, we might start to think of him as a troublemaker, so that in the future when he comes back with anything, here comes the troublemaker again. Where's your mind? Where did it come from? Where's it just gone? There's this vows to keep, and there's those vows to keep. He's not just asking us to sit nicely in an uncontrived state with the mind naturally settled in the deepest reality. That's all. So that first point about the Vajrayana vows was to do with the essence of the vows, or we can say the definition of the vows. So second point are the categories. And then as far as the categories of Vajrayana vows go, then we can make a two-fold categorization, three-fold categorization, four-fold categorization, five-fold categorization, six-fold categorization, seven-fold categorization, or an eight-fold categorization, as Rinpoche explained recently in the retreat house. We don't have the time. So then to make it simple, then very, very famously, there are the vows of the four main levels of Tantra, but those four levels sometimes are developed a little further into the six main levels or stages of Tantra. If we go through those four, then they are the Kriya Tantra, that means action Tantra. They are the second, the Charya Tantra, which means conduct Tantra. Third is the Yoga Tantra, or the Union Tantra. And fourth is the highest, it's Anuttara Yoga Tantra, which is the highest Yoga Tantra.
Ta ti tin la no ta zo dong ba pa ji hira zo dong ba ma ji ti ta ni yan yo de la no zhu xie de ta tin ji zu ge ba de zhu xie na.
If we make that into six, then the last one, the Anuttara Yoga Tantra, or the highest Yoga Tantra, is further subdivided into two, where we have the Father Tantra with its emphasis on skillful method, and the Mother Tantra with its emphasis on wisdom, primordial wisdom.
Tani ta de den zi ge za ban de ka re la na. Ta mo go no la no ri mo da ba yo ba re. Ta ji jari, jeri, mori, zhangziri se zhen da wo. Ta ri chen bo yin da wo. Ta ja la ma yo ba re. Ri. Di ri la ri do tan ni ta song ji chu song de xie de la na ta la ni dian ni ji de da song wa re se ta de zo xie ji yo ba re.
Some people say that these four main classes of Tantra were developed because of the 4 main castes in India, and that they correspond to the 4 functions that characterize those castes, such as the caste of the Brahmins, of the kings, of the warriors, and I don't know the other one. But anyway, it corresponds to somewhat in nature to the castes.
Tini ta kari songware lana ta mari techa leka yung mandrapa korongo luso yung mandrapa do rong do ngama ri thongje mandina ngama la jagala tendi yo bare tena rong luso ta ngama rong ta ri don thama do jio ta tendi so songwa ba yamada.
So from that point of view, then they corresponded to those 4 main types of people in India because they had different daily activities, they lived different types of lives, they held slightly different values, and so the methods presented by these tantras corresponded to those, suited those.
Ta songsi chi gong do tong ga na ta ndo sho ye dong to mu nga ja se ta nga ro so la nyom pa yo ba de de nyom pa ka thwa la yo ba de la la na nga ja chimbo hi chimbo la la na de mu hi chimbo la la na ndo sho hi chimbo ta de ni no na ro nyom pa hi che yo ba de ta de la dian ni ta nyom pa ye de la ni dian ni de ni sha je shuo je nan ju la ni mi bi je.
Then another way that we can explain these 4 different classes of Tantra is in terms of the main mind poison which is present. Some people have a predominance of desire, some have a predominance of anger and aggression, some have a predominance of confusion and ignorance, and some have a predominance of pride. And we can see those 4 classes of Tantra, by the nature of the way they are and what they do, as being remedies or means suited to people with the predominance of those mind poisons.
Tani ta dor chu du gana jide kari chong mongbo kari se du yin yong ta dang de ma ro zo ma thang ji san jia tang ji samba mandra ba re ta samba mandra ba yin di tira song ji go samba mandra ba la tiani tini chu mandra ba donan da cha song ba re ta ta uni ko ni nang da re.
So whichever way we look at it, then, I mean, they were just 2 examples. The real point is that the Buddha's teaching is quite varied, and this is because one aspect or another really suits one person or another. And when it comes to these 4 tantras, these 4 classes of tantra, then we find that they are suitable for different people. The one type of tantra speaks very much to one type of person more than another.
송지가 다 추송지다 코롱가 다 쳔바 진짜의 신이 송가진다고 말해. 근데 가르쳐 거리지나 더샤 코롱라 다 가르쳐 편 통도. 더샤라 되는 송가바 코나리. 근데 코롱가 쳔지다 히가나 송지가 돈이 다가 도되어 봐래. 근데 돈이 다가 도되나 다 히가gon지 싫어 메리. 근데 그리 고한진데 마도 쳔지 메리. 대인들이라 대 던지지 말이. 되니 더자 코로나 다 가리 패나. 되니 더 동탐바. 달라 산초지지. 달라 팬토지지. 되니도 송가 말이. 주통지.
So when the Buddha taught, it wasn't because he needed to express himself. It wasn't because he had something to explain from his own point of view. All of the Buddha's teaching is there to benefit his followers. That's the reason that teachings of all different sorts were given to different people in different circumstances. As far as what the Buddha himself had realized, he had the total realization of the void nature of mind. There's nothing to be said about that. He has nothing to express or to tell. So what his teaching is what people need to receive in order to benefit.
다 더나 예반다고 더래. 더니는 다 마도바. 도바시비 타. 다 가로 jelana 다 당황라는 송화의 가린다고 줘봐요. 되니 송화라 예와 가리요리 되히래. 다 대답하고 취대 다 당황 토면나 다 마도바디 다 가리조 토바시가 말이라나 디 토지가 다대 말이 다 선바.
The third main category in this text, after the definition and the telling us about the main categories of Vajrayana vows, is about how the vows are obtained. If somebody who hasn't got that commitment, hasn't got that level of practice, how to get it.
다디 다더 다 가리레지나 동보 라마리. 다 라마다 가리레지 거레지나 세이나 초바레지나 초키오바 말이. 라마요 천니도 된 거 말이. 다 라마 천니도 대마세지 가데리라나. 송화 그 따와 또 요바. 또 요바데 마세거 다 디초가라 소바는 키바. 맹어도 가리 대한거나 가송와 너는 기바지. 뭐냐 jel라는 니지 덴바. 동지 덴바 좀마. 다 들리죠 그 말이. 너는 천대란 천이 덴바라도 될 영한테 카 총아 총송하지. 너는 영한테 야보요 바지. 너는 그거 말이.
First, the samaya needs to be obtained from a guru, and not just any guru, it needs to be a fully qualified guru, a truly authentic guru, and we can define that authenticity by 4 characteristics. First, the guru needs to have realized what's called the view. In other words, their own profound inner realization in their mind, in their heart, needs to be the understanding of the view, voidness, or the Vajrayana view, voidness and appearance. The second quality is that they need to be very expert in the actual rituals and in the oral instructions that go with them, the person-to-person advice that's passed down through the lineage. They need to be expert in those practical aspects. Thirdly, it needs to be a person of intrinsic compassion, someone who's naturally compassionate. And fourth, it needs to be someone who, himself or herself, has perfectly maintained the vows. All 4 of those conditions need to be united for somebody to be called an authentic guru. The view, the expertise, the compassion, and the pure conduct.
니 전도 갈라이나 해히고 다 라만 천니세 비 몽보 동화 당진의 송어 바래. 얘나요. 수두거나 나로 그때나. 라마라 용때 니 니바디 호거든 나로 그때도. 라마야 보지. 용때 니. 용때 니다 다 가리라고 지거들라나. 라만 키바지 건도. 라만 니지 요거도. 디 용때 니다 니바다. 마롱 그디나 건도 다 대라나 카총왕아 총도 된도. 몽보지 송어래 디 수두거나 다 등이랑아 총도 된도.
Rinpoche is saying, actually, in the sutra level of teaching and the Vajrayana level of teaching, there is a lot that's written about teachers and their qualities in all sorts of ways. It's a vast topic. But if you really sum all of that up, is in his own opinion, his own conclusion, is that what makes a really good teacher, a really good guru, is the presence of 2 qualities. One is the expertise in whatever it is they're teaching, they're the guru for. And second is great compassion. Expertise and compassion are the marks of an authentic teacher.
가르릴라나? 라만 기바지면나? 나로고 녀래 제거나? 예히면도? 드니 나로라 배도면도? Then Naron Toba Rawu Yoda, Laman Kipamina, Toba Setamadu. Naron go chew. No Carignos Langanayo. The Hia Mahina. Then Malapetuchi woman, Tina, Lamala Yonta Yoga, Laman Kiga Sizi, Zavanga Tari.
The first of these is the expertise or the skill. And quite simply, if a lama, a guru, doesn't possess that, then they're never really going to be able to guide us. They're never going to be able to skillfully and truly know what is the best thing to do. They're not going to know how to correct what's going wrong. First, this skill, this true skill in guiding is needed.
Then Lamala Nije Gavare Nije Yona Romatala Tevayo Pare Romatala Sono Tomare the Pe Yapujirizi the Dungamezi Deva Dezi Lamata Tendi Sono Tomare Nije Mena Conchi Pacina Patu Siromere Carrezina Conkinki Lumambo Deni, Dini Coron Pecamoborosi, Coron Machimboresi, Kerochuzi, Dindra Sono Toni, Dini Lomatanji, Coron Pesho Tonzi, Coron Legalizin of Chonovare. That Dindi says one, Yon, keep a in a Pentu Yobamari, Dina, Tala Nijikandu, keep a Jala Nijikandu.
The second quality is that of compassion. And when a teacher has compassion, then this means they really love their students. They really care for them. And they're all the time, through that care, thinking, what's going to be good for this person? What's going to be, in the long term, making this person find happiness? What's going to be helping them to overcome their problems? Through that concern, there'll be really a very effective teacher seeking out the very best thing for their disciples. And if there is a teacher who is a very, very gifted person, very skilled, lots of expertise in the methodology and the methods, but who doesn't have compassion, then they're probably more likely going to be concerned with their own reputation, whatever it is, their reputation, with even making money out of what they do, with writing books or whatever it is. They'll be much more concerned about their own cleverness, about their own expertise, than they will be about the students' well-being. It's a very different set of priorities.
Carrilana, Lomaganola Carisiego, Yapuchida, here Matana, no hota, Cari, Nona Shen, Yapuchi Matana, Momala Shiro, Petuchimbo Mandu, Tainana, Ninji, Yola, Yonka Yoba, that 10 years had you, then Muni Lama Tiana, Nala Zaki Mandu, Carrilana, Lamala Ninji Apuori, Ninji Apuona, Lomala Petu, Kizimatu. Cola sono tomare rona. Lomala sono tomare. Then Lamala Yonte Apoyona, Narongo Yona Carisina Noamandi, Laman Kipachimore, Tina, Rona Yonte Jawari, Yonte Jaw, Narongo Yona Carisina Noamibari, Tina, Naronga Tina, Tusudina, Lama Niji Apoyo Pato, Lama Yonte Dinada, Kipaya Poyobaji, Teniona, Teni, Tayamba Carimena Yomicimandi, Lama Yoshuta. Mimian Ayo, Campo Imai Mundi, Rumpuchi Imai Mundi, Hoya Shajido Chujita, Carina Mito Mato Jamandi, Nona Niji Opachido, Yonta Yotadilla, Tangaron, La, Sonjin Ravore, Shajin Ravore, Rumpuchin Ravore, Campo Ravore, Marola, Ta, Nona Tandi Opari.
So then, if a teacher, a guru, is very compassionate, really cares for the students, but if they lack the skill, then no matter how much they care for them, they're not really going to know what is the best advice to give. They won't know when it's the time for this aspect of Mahayana practice, this aspect of Vajrayana practice. No matter how much they care, they're not gifted enough or skilled enough to give good advice. So, to sum it up, then those two qualities, when they're both present, they really do make for a good teacher. They make for a good guru. It's somebody who really cares for their followers and somebody who has the skill and the expertise to guide them along the path, however much that expertise enables them to do it. Now, this doesn't really matter whether they carry a title of Rinpoche, Tulku, Khenpo, any of these external qualifications. Rinpoche said even if somebody has none of those qualifications at all, but if they care for the ones that they're looking after with compassion, and they have true skill in the way they guide them, and he said as far as he's concerned, that person is like a Buddha. That person is a Rinpoche, a very precious person. That person is a Khenpo, which means a friend in virtue, and so on and so forth.
Tani ta lomare. Ta lomala ta kariyo gaware lana. Nije tong. Tani ta sanje tong ji gedang zubo zong ji ju kompo toba tong do tong. Tani deba yabu. Ta ndonan taniyo gaware.
So then, they're the qualities of a teacher, of a guru, because we're looking at how a pure vow, a pure bond can be obtained. So first, that's the qualities of the teacher, from the teacher's side. Then from the follower's side, I don't know quite what's best to call it, disciple, student, whatever. From the follower's side, then there are two main qualities. One is compassion for sentient beings, and the other is faith in noble beings, faith in the Buddhas and enlightened beings. Compassion for sentient beings and faith and devotion to enlightened beings.
Tani lomayong deba meke, nije meke, ta tandi jina, tani lamati chudongo, non tandi sejitala. Pento me but the dom me in Wari. Pena Samayapu, Dinada, Jichibu, Yankilitena, Ti, Pesho Majena, Ti, Mupoto, Dome by Chondora, Petendawari, Lamati, Donga Samoton, the Chatena, Ti, Lomati, Carirelana, Sentiara Pentoma, Niji Obamari, Lama Rayon, Teba Obamari, Nonea Pusimari, Koichi Umari, Titina, Ti, Donga, Domi, Chizunia to Pondovari. Lomayon, Tepayoba, Njeoba. Ta, the
If a Dharma practicer doesn't have those two qualities, then there's not much point in pursuing this establishing or trying to establish a Vajrayana Samaya. It will be pointless. And the reason for this is, it would be like giving somebody precious or sophisticated tools and they're never going to use them for anything. They're wasted. They're pointless. Because if there is the Vajrayana practice and it's used to benefit sentient beings because of the person's compassion, that's good. If there is compassion, they'll be used. Probably if there's no compassion, then the teachings won't be used to help other people, which is their main end purpose. If there is no faith and devotion, then there won't be the proper attitude of trust and respect for the teacher and the teachings, and the practice by its very nature won't be able to be accomplished properly. So if there is a disciple who wants the teachings but who lacks those two qualities, then it's just a waste to give them.
Danini ta tobashi on the tare. Ta onrana shajogong, shojogong, nanjojong, tala on mandabayobare, koru hichachina, ta chodo chopan la sopa onkawa shaji shoje nanjojo, nanjolana mipi jelana, ta on yihaka, ta tenisiyobare, di on the tare.
So then the next part of these teachings takes us on now from the qualities of the Lama and the student on to the actual process for attaining the Samaya. And this is attained through empowerment. And So this section deals with the different types of empowerment that belong to the various classes of Tantra. And then depending whether it's Kriya, Charya, Yoga Tantra or highest Yoga Tantra, then there are many different ways of bestowing empowerment. Some features are very dominant, such as what's called the Buddha crown, empowerment of the 5 Buddha families, which is found in many of them. Or when we come to the highest Yoga Tantra, then by far and away the main thing are the 4 stages of empowerment.
Tatita mandapa yobate, Pena Narosu Susatabika Layong, Tachi Genya, Gets, Gelon, Cylinder, Rimadapa Mombojiwa, Pete Yanda, Hoga Gasolina Yung, Ta Shaja Gontoba, then Shoja Gontoba, Nanjo Gontoba, Ta, Donan, the Mandapa Yobare, the Inditirana, Donan, what you want to do by Yolan Siena, Ta, only wants to do by Togabare. The Dino Montia, on to Romeo. Kako Yobamari, they may own who Yobari, Matina Katwa on Yonsuba, Penana, Denjo, Java Janso, Pomo, Tatata. On Yonsuba Yobari, Tata Kenu, Pajangatina, Pajakenu, the Tandi, the G on Tomato Sejita, Ta on Gotanta, Runi Comola, Lagavari, the Tomato, Rolls on the Tonjiri Matu, the Toyobari Yobamari Lagana. Like it,
each of these different types of empowerment has its own specificities and things which need to be done. Rinpoche doesn't know here how many people have, let's use the words as specific, how many people have acquired empowerment. The number of people who have received empowerments, probably a lot. I missed out a whole section at the beginning. Yeah, first of all, there are all these different ways of empowerment because just like when we had the self-liberation vows, there are different stages of vow to suit different people. We had the lay people's vows, we had novice vows, full monk, nuns vows. These suit people's aspirations and also their possibilities of being able to maintain the vows. In a similar way, these different empowerments and the samaya that comes with them suit different people at different stages. That's why there is a range. But then, when it comes to the vow, there is what is called attaining or acquiring the vow. And this is not the same as simply attending the vow and receiving the symbolic transmission. So, again, this is something Rinpoche says we'd need to understand quite what that means for each stage of the empowerment, what truly receiving it means, and then we'd need to understand for each step of empowerment, we'd need to think, has that happened for me yet, or not? So each person would, again, just as we looked at, are we Vajrayana or Mahayana or Hinayana practices? We'd need to know what each stage of empowerment is, and then to ask, have I really received that, acquired that? So that's it for the formal teaching this afternoon, and tomorrow we'll move on to look at the particular vows and commitments that once received the empowerment that there are to keep in terms of the different tantras. And Rinpoche invites your questions. Yes, Maggie.
On your last point, I know Rinpoche is very clear whether he's prescribed initiation or empowerment. When his general ones in the temple, he always called empowerment, he always calls initiation. And when he's talking about the empowerments that were given for the retreat, he uses the word empowerment. And unfortunately, I have to receive both, just told very firmly. That helps.
Yes. I'll ask him, although that's that's using the two English words in a way that doesn't correspond to Tibetan equivalents. But I can ask the question because I understand the difference. The Ngoma the Akonremucheke Lakanti Nangla Dene Wang Nangware. Then in Kapte Konge de Sungindo the Wang second Pache Chinlap Tabore. Penanganiki Wang Yena Samkang la Yopa Dene Rimbarere la Maniki Yonsusopa Nang Top Gokendo. De Pache Megang Yongnaki Pache Chinlap Tabore. And then Mato Dene Mompala the Nyamnen Doken Yena Dene Wang Nyamnen Cheki Wang Yore in Yanganiki Wang the Maniki Drupa ki me Matok Penat Samkang Ginangla then
on la no ta akonomuchi sonji de shlan da wo la da tni sonji de la dina jinon da wo ji song san de yu zhen de on la no on yong zu ge ji do on jinon ji ni ho pare de na na ta on ge jinon ina on cha song ge ma ma re on ta ji la gang chu zang ji ma da zang ji de ta tni da wo ji la on ge jinon se ji ge ji pare现在等办着，我呀，等你呢，我用是做把来呢，他嘣送行我就看从各个的，当然呢，我用做了吧的，可是一弄一难着，我用是做把一难着，先拉到的，你看先拉的，对，先拉了，他各种了没得把有吧的，先拉开的谁个吧的呢？六拉星期了吧，我拉星期了吧，一拉星期了吧。另外要是了，先来写过，看从哪的，先来写的，等你先来，头有么的，各种个，到这工地去把它的，我说没着了上东个的，等你，就恰从这个等你写的呢，他这工作我呢，原来恰从写，他等你写的了呢，他就恰从写的基本上我就做个的没的，都是那人家人家让我这样的，怎么的？
Yeah, one can draw a distinction between the two, but not in too clear-cut a way, because it depends on the circumstances. But a distinction can be drawn in the Tibetan. It's probably the easiest way to do it. There's what's called the total empowerment. It's called utterly complete empowerment is one thing. And there's what's called the subsequent manifestation, or jenang in Tibetan. It's either yonzok, that absolutely complete, or jenang, what's called the subsequent manifestation. And nearly always when we have the sort of empowerments we receive here in the temple, they're all that second sort. They're not the fully complete empowerment in its various stages, which can be very, very complex. Both of them have blessing. So we can't, although very often in the way in English and to make it easily understandable for people, we say either you can take this as a blessing or else it can be like this. Then Rinpoche said that they're both blessing because the very nature of the ceremony is the blessing of body with the deity's form, blessing of speech with the mantra, blessing of the mind and so on. It's a blessing in either case. It's just that in the full form, which is sometimes given, for instance, in the retreat, then not only is the ceremony itself complete, but it is also given to those who are going to practice it. So there's a difference in the complexity of the ceremony, and there's a difference in the intention. When it's given in the Jenang, the second form, it authorizes people to practice. But in the retreat circumstances and in traditional circumstances, one of the deeper meanings of empowerment is it is the first step of very intense practice of that. That's what he said. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
I think, yeah.
Regarding the vow not to kill, if you have to kill in self-defense or to protect someone else, would that still be breaking the vow?
The sosotapi dongpa kinangla, then sokchopa yore, then rangi docha shedang latene mayimpa, pena mishenda sungwicher miche sena, demena miche rangla napachekindo rangla segire, then rangi sungwicher do mishenda la sokchena, di chiparebe, di kakare,
소소 타바 이거 시나 저바래 아니 동안이와래 고노 담바 동로와래 다 무슨 동라 때도 온 폰지요 바래 베나 머니 nga 잡고지도 nga 베나너 게스이나다 게냐이나다 게냐이나다 제바면도 nga dom바요 캔 네 먼저고지 녜니 추파잖아 그가라 면다자 네 콜라 면다잖아 nga 마히카 코혀소나 nga dom바 동로와래 코 마히카 nga 마히카 코 지라샤나 nga dom바 동와래 tala punjiyo pare kunda woji pena majira nga majira nga domba yore nga la ngi chupa ja ngi kola menta ja kha ko so
chirang kola meda ja
ko nga la menta ja to che di tera ngi nya ga da shonro re
chirang
nga rong hyo ko hyo nga ko ngama hyana pena kama nga da woji ko ngama hyo so na nga kama nga gi la hyana pena nga tata hesona tezo karezo kohyana nyonde tido kila hese kabora keji tido kama jigi tido te tezo ngijinda usona nga jimanda ucho konghama hena nga domba hyondo bare hakoso pena ko ngani menda jana ngenya hwara hena nyonde hmara
namjoshi rewa
nyonde hmara kama jigi tido hetamara 대좀 분이 로서라
됐어
배나 까마지 그나하마 까마지 공하마 저도 뒤 신녀가 뒤켜노 말아 배나 간다고 다다해나 드니 고혀지라고 이래서 뭐지 때도 주라 뭐냐 느리게 켜마라 아 켜나 드니 지마라고 켜라 때도 뭐지 주라 주서라 뭐지 니만 이래서래 용 로서라
나서
맞아, 또 뒤라 해나 용기 대도 punjin ro래. 니마 냐가 대들이 제해서 갈리 가보라라. 배나 nga 지라로 공마 해나. 그 대도 나서나. 그 해지 하나. nga dom바 동로 와리. nga dom바 효로 와리. 하고서 뭐냐. nga 해나. 그 지마 해나. nga dom바 동마리. nga domba hyo mare nga ngama hesona ko jima hena nga domba yore de yera yina yo ni tsechila momase je khilon re te yin ditela na nga khidi tela ko khama so ta nga domba nga khele doni domba ko ronge de nga te dime khina se mere khina se me na nga domba ton ta mere ta domba hyo mande ta tedo se ton la punju yo pare dime domba hyo mo hyo chibayo ba mare deni tehe tepa chenbi 소산다고 지레디오나 드니 뭐 해동 가가요래 또 가르리지나 domba 코롱 소노 동동 라히고 말이 tepa chenbi domba 소노 동동도 tepa mem비 domba 소노 동동 생각가 쳐디고 말이 드니는 소노 동동 뭐야 더 뭐라 봐 쳐요래 되면 테메 이거시나 domba 효아래
as far as losing the vow goes, because that's what we're talking about, whether you lose the vow or keep the vow, in any of those circumstances, which is killing somebody to protect other people, or killing them in self-defense, the vow is lost. It's just the same as killing them for any other reason. The very fact of taking another person's life means that the vow is broken. It's very sort of straightforward in that respect. And then I'm sorry it took so long. I was just trying to understand. It was a sort of a little technical flip, which is saying, imagine that two people are in a fight and they kill each other. Like they've got guns and somehow they both shoot each other, but they don't die straight away. Then, if one person has the vow and the other person doesn't have the vow, then whether the person who has the vow loses it or not depends on who dies first. Because if the other person dies before the person who's got the vow dies, then there's been a killing that's happened before death, and the vow is taken from the time you take it until the moment you die. So that means that then the vow has been broken. But if they're both dying, but the person who's got the vow dies first, then the other person hasn't died before the person who had the vow has died. So that means they haven't technically committed murder during the duration of the vow. So they've not lost the vow. As far as the vows of individual liberation are concerned, then it's straightforward. Taking another life loses the vow. But in the circumstances you describe, what there is a difference in motivation. And there can be a difference in motivation. There can be a Mahayana motivation behind an action, which means the karma will be different, but still that pratimoksha vow is lost. The difference in motivation doesn't affect the losing of the vow, which is determined by physical circumstances.
Pena so tabi khicha khi gana pe mombore pe sono to sa mombo yore le labo mare mamanga khirala Thrangu thor lo da no la so taba jibe de dawa don re ji re chi chi hi ti nga ma pele thama so ke ji gamare nga chi ba pha hi ge chore ti ro le thama so.
It gets really complicated because once one gets into the details and the technicality of what exactly these pratimoksha vows imply, what breaks it, what doesn't break it, and when you start to get into all the different possibilities. He said before, when he was teaching just these pratimoksha vows, just the self-liberation vows, not Mahayana or Vajrayana, he was doing this in the Thrangu Rinpoche's college in Sanath, the higher education college, and he said they were 7 months solid working on the individual liberation vows, and they still hadn't really finished it properly. Of course, you go into all these different technicalities and possibilities of that. He said it gets really complex.
Kanji no la po just yore. Po te just tamba to yore. Moya ti so taba chi ma. Damba ri zo kari che o ti ri he o ti la po te just to yore. Li la bo se ram de. Na just no ni ki ta ta ma so. Ho chung ni da nga ti. Po te just yore so ji ka po gi yo no la. Matidi he de la na po the just the ki de kare ta tha ma zu de ngama pa ma so chu se de so ta lo chi no la ma do do ni ta chu se te ngama lo ma so ta po de ki lo ko so po the just no po the jung ni de nga ti ni he
in our scriptures in the Tripitaka, then on the Vinaya there are 13 tomes, 13 large volumes. So when Rinpoche was teaching the Vinaya, the Pratimoksha aspect of Vinaya in the Shedra, then he got through 12 of those 13 tomes, and there just wasn't time, given the yearly schedule, to do the 13th one. Yeah.
We can study for 12 months before we take the vows. I mean, we just take the vows like that without studying, so we don't understand what we're doing, do we?
Pen naranso drabo, then dompa shunna, the dompa mashuinganna, then lopchon den drabo ke tosuke yomare, Pache Mimangchewa Dompa Shuken, the Dompa Karare Akugimendo, Young Dompa Shuken.
Took Munis on a Kentabore, the Gakewanare, Karedina, Dompa Hamahona Karisi Kere, sounds in our children, Karisini Kerira, Domango Mahin, Doma Yapo Mahin, Karisini Doma Kerira. In the Yenayo, Cherosora Jingo, Munisena, Lee Labore, Kalikabomari, Karire Lana, Dombo, Kasoni Laya, Ninju, Sonuchi, Yabuchi Lerushi. Teni, ta, Madame Toti, son with Tituzo di Hijitani, Dombo Kachi or in Dula Yangi, Cason Cherry, that you limit Hakomazomo. Teni, Gadu. Teni, ta, Genya Rawina, Nakina, Kiker Hakogunu, Nani, Nangaina, Ni, son, yo, nga, Teni, Teniki, the Mexigamari, Teniki, ta, Lozo Seguna, Choroso, Lilabonore, the Sang, ta Carre. Penangaroso Terry Lanton goes in the Wojis and Cani Leo on the Chili Degote, Tenida or Maripena, Suchi, ya, that's all Carizo Chiamaniaman, Suchi, the Gendia Wojiri. Then the Hage the Carrier, that King Aron Party on a little Labo Labonda Wochi. Genya that at home, you knew the way. Then he Penana Jachabonda Wotinisagana, only Labo Mediti, that he drones on the late Labonda Wochi, Chodio by or Tanga Suchi Yamandu. On a tanga the Yamandu. She technically Sanki Gazon Li Labo Calisero Cabomari. Mazon Machina, the Carisi in Dombakeri.
That's strange. Strange in a couple of ways. First of all, it is strange because it's back to front. Really, if you're taking a commitment to do something, it makes absolute sense to know what you're doing. Otherwise, that's the whole point of taking a commitment. You're saying, I'm not going to do this, or I'm going to do this. And if you don't know what it is, then it's not even really a commitment in some ways. That's true, but then it does happen that people take vows and then they learn more about them afterwards. So in a way, that is strange, that very often we take a first step without knowing too much what we're doing, and we understand more about it as it goes along. Really and truly, we ought to know what we're doing before we do it. That's the best. But he says, actually, it's really pretty simple. It's not like what we were doing this morning, where you have to do shamatha and then find that amazing subtlety to stay within shamatha and let the mind discover itself and rest itself. That's challenging. It might take, no one knows how long that would take. As far as vows go, it's so straightforward. You just see the list and it says, well, you take a vow not to kill. Not to kill means this and this and this and that. It doesn't take very much to understand it. It doesn't take very long to read it. Of course, when the whole thing is developed as he was developing it in the Shedra, with every possible possibility, the history of these vows and everything like that, then it becomes a very vast affair. But for someone who wants to live by certain commitments, it can be very simple and straightforward. And also, because of this flexibility of the vows, you can start by taking the vows that you understand. Say, refuge +1, refuge +2, precepts or +3, or then when it's the novice it's only 33, which are quite simple. 32, 33, 30 something. And so it's not that difficult.
볼라나 다다 캠보지도 처선로 루세지요 바리. 다 파제 로 고노 이게 지게 가기인지리. 로 충주 지고 나라 볼라 파제 다든키 파제 요지 말에 손진다고 요리 운동화 가르리 시에거든요. 콩산이 넘바해나 게냐이나라 게세이나라 게노이나라 게냐이나 콩고 넘바 nd송걸레레세 코라테레 동보 탄디가살라 니니니 태양거레레세 마 넘바 몽보시니 쿠파 트히오 바레 드니 게선라고지 게노고 넘바지 휴나 요메나 마 동스 차지 따 용지니 거 바레 다 차지 당선돼야 뭐야 차지 다 용지지 고첫 차지 용면나 더면나 그런 거 건너니 개량 거 말이 나 당선지 야부지 다홍 지고 이게 힘이 지나别힘이 지도 이게 힘나 그 마홍 발라는 유바시고 나 당선 차지 다홍 저 개량시는 근데 공부도 안 하는 거래 뭐라라 이게 뭐히 그냥 배 뭐뭐래 보바노라 이게 때문에 뭐히 이나 얘나 계산하고 돈 받히나 자와 이거는 총 나도 그런 야보지도 희해고 지고 로란지 키나시 그 말이 겐룬다고 코 힐이나 이게 마히나요 겐룬다고 히나 팔로 자단세고 다 쪼지도 저동요 말이 다 겐룬 순자 맞아도 미자도 나증아 선요리디 디노니 쪼다 방바기 라마 또 방로 받던 쓰던시나 방로 저동요 말이 또 로리야 보지도 콜렌지도 키나시 그 말이 또 키나 맞이나 공부 돈 받대 놓 말이 다 되니다로 시나 되니지 야본라 조선디와
Rinpoche is remembering one Lama in Tibet who was called a Khenpo Lhabu.
이렇게 받쳐버려
Very, very, very gifted and skilled master. And he would give ordination, but whenever he gave ordination, he would only give it when people promised when people understood what they were doing. So for those who could read and write, those who could read, then they would have to promise to learn properly what the vows they were undertaking meant. And for those that couldn't read, because there were many people in Tibet who couldn't read, then they had to learn the essential precepts by heart. And so he made a point of only giving ordinations to people who had a very clear idea of what they were doing. He would spend some time explaining it first, and then for those who could read, he'd get them to promise to him, to make a pledge to actually study these things further. For those who couldn't read, then it depends on the vows, but there are the 4 root downfalls that everyone needs to know, and then depending whether it's novice vows or the full monk's vows, although the full vows are many in number, there are 17 essential ones, I think it is in there. So whatever were the essential ones, they had to learn those by heart and understand them clearly.
자, 가송이 소타리 드자 돈바 드자 자치부조 히메레 쪼쪼 자와라 드자 히레 드디망하로 디소메레 자와라고 드자 드니 카송아가 이게 배 지송 바다디딜 문이 야부조 지송 야나용 히라 야부지 여로죠 근데 이게 지고는 편도 만도 드자 돈바송지 중주 뒤뒤 시행공지도 로라래 드디시 시행으로 저 카송아가 마주 카송아가로서 돈바 상가 휴가지 되면 파제메레 몽니마도 더니 다 돈바송지 통한 광고 얘기도 가만히 다 디노를 저래 내가 세조는 세모죠 다 세지만 그 갈리카버리 당가 얘기도 쓸려 다 세조도와 근데 라 갈리카버라 근데 마양 빠지가 문이 디돈바 가리나 뜻자와라부터 주세나 야부지데 이거 드지지데 마주 당가리 한다고 들에 nga hizi de karire jena ta joroso nga sotha domba hyore songji sanji domba hyore nga go domba hyore ta songdong da ji hi song de de ji pendong da yo ne ji hi song hi de.
The teachings that Rinpoche has given us on the vows, for instance on the self-liberation vows in the first days of this course, are very few indeed compared to all of the teachings on those things. This was really the essence of a summary. It was the most concise form because we have such time constraints in this course. And so he really gave us the most essential things, the key points. It couldn't really get any shorter than that. And so what he says is, please, because it is the simplest, shortest form, please learn it. Don't leave it in your notebooks. In your notebooks, it's no use to you. This is something that we need to understand, and especially if we have taken those vows, or some of those vows, then it's no good thinking I've taken vows and I've got it written down somewhere what I'm supposed to be doing, where you have to sort of look in a book or take out a notebook or think, which shelf did I leave that file on that tells me how I'm supposed to be living. It's not sense. This is really a very, very short form. He says he's come here with a hope to help us. He hopes his teachings bring some benefit, but that benefit is not very much if everything just stays a scribble in notebooks. It's something we need to take into our hearts and understand and learn.
저로서 개념이나 다 저로서 송자 가린다고 지올리지 지글하나 아마 소안이는 캠보 잡아지 총소 코 개는 거 개념 그 송자들 지히에 송디 당아 이해티오디 노라 라송스 노라요 노라요 다다하 고지멜라나 네 괜찮다고 저로는 드리나 가서 하라고.
Rinpoche says if, for instance, say you've taken Upasaka precepts and somebody asks you about it, you say, oh, have you taken vows? They say, yeah, I'm a layperson, I'm an Upasaka. And they say, oh, well, what does that involve? And you say, that fat Khenpo who came to Samiling explained it all and I wrote it down in a book. Just a moment, I'll go and have a look and tell you about it. Then it will be really embarrassing. It shouldn't be like that.
근데 나로서 같은 알아 깔리리라 제로서 깔리지 얘가 데라 티손 털어지 나용들이 깔리시 깨지용들이 깔리시 되니 배도 좀 돼.
Rinpoche went through all the bother of talk to tell us about it. We went through all the bother of writing it down like that. So if afterwards we don't learn it, then his time's wasted, our time's wasted.
Okay. Yeah.